Before Beyoncé, before Taylor Swift, there was a woman who ruled the stage with fire in her voice and thunder in her soul. She was adored, feared, envied, and betrayed. A diva who turned every aria into a weapon, every note into a battle cry. This is not just music. This is war. This is the story of Maria Callas, the most feared diva in opera history.
Maria Callas, a cinematic portrait of the most feared diva. They called her La Divina, the Divine One. But the press, her rivals, and the powerful men who ran her world had another name for her, the Tigress. She is one of the only opera singers whose name echoes far beyond the gilded walls of the opera house. It's a name that conjures not just music, but scandal, power, heartbreak, and a tragedy so profound it could only be called operatic. Maria Callas didn't just perform opera, she ignited it, she bled for it, and in the end it consumed her. Her life was a tempest of impossible highs and soul-crushing lows, of global adoration and intensely private anguish. She didn't just change her art form, she shattered it and rebuilt it in her own image, unearthing forgotten masterpieces and setting an unbreakable new standard for what it meant to be a singing actress. Yet for every headline that celebrated her genius, another screamed about her temper, her feuds, and her turbulent love life. She was a living paradox, an artist of unshakable discipline who was painted as an uncontrollable monster, a woman who commanded the world's greatest stages, but who, offstage, desperately craved a love she could never seem to hold on to. So, how did the woman with the voice of an angel get the reputation of a demon? Was she the monster the papers created? Or was she a ferocious, uncompromising artist who knew her worth in a world that wasn't ready to hear it? To understand the legend, we have to uncover the woman. And that story begins not on a grand stage, but in the quiet cruelty of a childhood where she was never wanted.
Born into a world of rejection, I was Maria Callas, a daughter unwanted. My mother, desperate for a son, ignored me for days. That was just the beginning. My childhood vanished under the weight of her dreams, replaced by endless singing lessons. I was the ugly duckling, overshadowed by my sister, always compared, always insecure. When my parents' marriage shattered, we returned to Greece, just as war loomed. At the conservatoire, my voice was called a phenomenon of nature. But as I trained, my life crumbled. We starved under occupation. My mother's demands grew darker. Forced to survive, I felt used, the bond with my mother forever broken. This brutal past forged my artistry, but left me with an aching emptiness. In 1945, I returned to America, ready to conquer the world, but talent alone wouldn't be enough.
Section 2. La Divina Ascendant. Returning to New York, Callas was met with a wall of rejection, including a failed audition at the prestigious Metropolitan Opera. Then, a single encounter changed her destiny. An Italian talent scout heard her voice and secured her a debut in 1947 at the Verona Arena. It was in Verona that she met Giovanni Battista Meneghini, a wealthy, older industrialist who became instantly obsessed with her. He became her manager, her protector, and in 1949, her husband. Meneghini gave her the stability to focus purely on her art, but it was a fraught partnership she would later claim was rooted in exploitation. With her life managed, Callas unleashed her genius upon Italy. Under the guidance of the masterful conductor Tullio Serafin, she conquered the most demanding roles. But it was an act of seeming insanity in Venice in 1949 that rewrote the rules of opera. While starring as the powerful, heavy warrior Brünnhilde in Wagner's Die Walküre, the lead soprano for the next opera, Bellini's light, acrobatic I Puritani, fell ill. With only 6 days to prepare, Callas took the role. Singing the vocal equivalent of a heavyweight boxer and a world-class gymnast in the same week was considered impossible. But she did it. The feat was a seismic shock to the opera world, and it launched the Callas Revolution, the great revival of the bel canto repertoire. She took these forgotten operas, once dismissed as pretty and shallow, and revealed them to be works of profound dramatic fire. In 1951, she made her debut at the world's most celebrated opera house, La Scala in Milan. It became her kingdom. She collaborated with visionary directors like Luchino Visconti, who famously said he only began directing opera because of Maria Callas. So what was the revolution? It was her absolute devotion to dramatic truth. Before Callas, opera was often a park and bark affair. Singers stood still and produced beautiful sounds. Callas rejected that entirely. For her, the music and words were sacred. She didn't sing notes. She inhabited characters. When she sang Tosca, she was the jealous diva. When she sang Norma, she was the tormented priestess. Her voice itself was a controversial instrument. It wasn't always beautiful. It had a raw, cutting edge. But she weaponized its so-called flaws, turning them into tools of devastating emotional expression. Then came the transformation. Between 1953 and 1954, Callas shed nearly 80 pounds, morphing from a heavy-set woman into a figure of impossible, Audrey Hepburn-esque elegance. The world was utterly mesmerized. She was no longer just an opera singer, she was a global icon. This was her golden age, the undisputed queen of every stage from Milan to London to New York. But as her star ascended to godly heights, the whispers began. And the very same intensity that made her a genius on stage would soon be used to paint her as a monster off it. The tigress uncaged. As Callas's fame detonated, so did the media's obsession. The press, once infatuated with La Divina, now hunted for a more sellable story. The difficult diva. The incidents became legendary, twisted and amplified by a ravenous global press. There was the supposed feud with rival soprano Renata Tebaldi, a war fanned by their respective fan clubs. The most famous quote, almost certainly fabricated, has Callas comparing Tebaldi's voice to sparkling water while her own was cognac. There were battles with powerful managers, like her public firing from the Met by Rudolph Bing over a contract dispute, but the moment that forever branded her as volatile was the Rome walkout in January 1958. She was scheduled to open the Rome opera season in her signature role, Norma, for the President of Italy. Feeling sick the day before, she warned management she might not be able to perform and begged them to have an understudy ready. They arrogantly refused, reportedly telling her, "No one can double Callas." She went on, but from the first act, her voice was clearly in distress. Faced with the choice of continuing and potentially ruining her voice, she made a professional decision. She withdrew after the first act. The response was not sympathy. It was a maelstrom of fury. The press didn't report that a sick singer was protecting her instrument. They reported that a hysterical diva had thrown a tantrum and insulted the nation. Newsreels maliciously used old footage of her looking healthy to sell the lie. Callas was devastated by the betrayal. A doctor confirmed she had bronchitis, and she eventually won a lawsuit against the opera house, but the damage was done. The Tigress label was now permanent. Was this reputation fair? In a world run by men, her refusal to compromise was not seen as the mark of a genius, but the hysteria of a woman. As she herself said, "I will always be as difficult as necessary to achieve the best." In a man, that was ambition. In her, it was a character flaw. The scandals began to poison her spirit. She felt hunted, misunderstood, and utterly exhausted by the fight. She was looking for an escape. And it was at this exact moment that a man stepped out of the shadows, offering a world of glittering refuge. His name was Aristotle Onassis, and their collision would trigger the most passionate and most destructive act of her life, the Siren's Song. Maria Callas met the Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis at a party in 1957. He was a force of nature, crude, charismatic, and one of the wealthiest men on earth. He saw in her a fellow Greek who had bent the world to her will. Their affair ignited in the summer of 1959 aboard his yacht, the Christina O. Surrounded by unimaginable luxury under the Greek sun, their attraction became explosive. By the time the cruise ended, her marriage was over. For Callas, Onassis represented a total escape from the crushing demands of her career. She had sacrificed everything for her art. Now she wanted to live. She all but abandoned the stage, trading her throne for the role of a billionaire's companion. Their decade-long affair was a global spectacle. But behind the glamorous photographs, the relationship was a storm. According to her private letters and friends, Onassis was a controlling, demeaning, and at times brutal partner. Callas yearned for children, a desire that led to unbearable heartbreak. It's widely believed she became pregnant at least once, but was allegedly pressured into an abortion by Onassis, who loved the prestige she brought him but refused to give her the family she craved. Then, in October 1968, came the final public betrayal. The world was stunned by the news. Aristotle Onassis had married Jacqueline Kennedy. Callas learned about it from the press. The humiliation was absolute and devastating. Onassis had chosen the ultimate status symbol, marrying an American queen. Publicly, Callas maintained a fragile composure. Privately, she was annihilated. But the story wasn't over. The marriage to Jackie was famously troubled, and it wasn't long before Onassis returned to Maria. They resumed their affair in secret, meeting for years in her Paris apartment. His own driver would later claim that Callas was Onassis's true wife, the one real love of his life. When he lay dying in a hospital in 1975, he kept a red blanket she had given him by his side. This last secret chapter was a bitter comfort. The years with Onassis had cost her everything. She had sacrificed the prime of her artistic life for a man who betrayed her, chasing a dream of domestic happiness that proved to be an illusion. And while she was living this grand, tragic love story, the divine instrument that had made her a legend was beginning to die. The fading light. The decline of Maria Callas's voice is one of music's great tragedies. The signs began in the mid-1950s. A wobble on high notes, a loss of control. By the 1960s, the decay was undeniable, and the theories were endless. The most popular culprit was her dramatic weight loss, which some argue stripped away the physical support her demanding technique required. Others blamed her brutal early schedule, flying between heavy dramatic roles and light acrobatic ones, a feat that may have inflicted irreparable damage. Then there was the psychological warfare, the betrayals, the public battles, and the emotional torment of her relationship with Onassis. The woman and the artist were one and the same. As her heart broke, so did her voice. Her physical health was also collapsing. She suffered from what was eventually diagnosed as dermatomyositis, a degenerative neuromuscular disorder that would have directly attacked her vocal control. Her last full opera performance was Tosca in London in July 1965. She was only 41 years old, an age when most great sopranos are just reaching their peak. The years that followed were a painful mix of retreat and courageous, flawed attempts at a comeback. From 1971 to 1972, she held a series of now legendary masterclasses at the Juilliard School. The events were spectacles. Here, her genius was undiminished. She was a brilliant, exacting teacher, dissecting music with the soul of an artist, even if her own voice could no longer demonstrate her intent. In the early 1970s, she undertook a final world concert tour. It was a commercial triumph, proof that her star power was eternal, but artistically, it was agonizing. Her voice was a fragile ruin, the high notes often failing her. For those who remembered her glory, it was heartbreaking. After the tour, she vanished, retreating into a self-imposed exile in her Paris apartment. The woman who had once commanded the world was now a solitary figure, haunted by ghosts. On September 16, 1977, Maria Callas died of a heart attack. She was only 53. The divine voice was silent forever. The enduring echo. In the wake of her death, the narrative was set in stone. A Greek tragedy. The brilliant artist, destroyed by a broken heart, who faded away in lonely isolation. It's a compelling myth. But to see her life only as a tragedy is to miss the point entirely. It ignores the power of her will. Her true legacy is not one of failure, but of revolution. Maria Callas fundamentally changed opera. Before her, the goal was beautiful sound. After her, it was dramatic truth. She proved that a flawed voice, guided by genius, could be infinitely more powerful than a perfect one with no soul. Every singer who has come after her lives in a world that she created. She single-handedly resurrected the bel canto repertoire, rescuing masterpieces from obscurity. Her recordings remain the gold standard, the benchmark against which all others are judged. And the Tigress? Today, we can see that caricature for what it was. The fury of a brilliant woman demanding perfection in a system that was not built for her. Her life was filled with immeasurable pain, a loveless childhood, a great love that betrayed her, and the slow, agonizing grief of losing her gift. But she was never merely a victim. She was a warrior. The idea that she simply gave up is false. In her final years, she made a film. She taught those legendary masterclasses, and she completed a grueling world tour. This was not a woman who surrendered. Maria Callas remains an icon because her art and her life were one. They were equally dramatic, passionate, and magnificent. She gave every part of herself to her music, and in doing so, she became immortal. She was, and is, La Divina. The story of Maria Callas is one that still fascinates and divides us. Was she a victim or a fighter? A misunderstood genius or a difficult diva? What part of her story stays with you the most? Let us know in the comments. And for more stories about the titans of opera, make sure you subscribe to Opera Brownn. Maria Callas was not simply an opera singer. She was a storm, a woman whose very presence could silence a room, whose voice could pierce hearts, and whose defiance rewrote the rules of music itself. She terrified rivals, enraged critics, and yet she lifted opera to heights it had never known. Her triumphs were dazzling, her scandals were legendary, and her shadow still lingers over every stage where a soprano dares to stand. They called her La Divina, but divinity always comes with a price. Maria Callas gave everything for her art, and in return, the world crowned her immortal. If her story gripped you, don't stop here. Step into the full cinematic journey of opera's most dangerous arias, fearless divas, and unforgettable moments. Watch the full playlist, and let the drama of opera consume you.